It was a cool Friday evening when Maya and her family walked through the elegant wooden doors of Willow's Bistro, a local restaurant known for its cozy ambience and gourmet dishes. Maya, a brilliant high school senior with dreams of becoming a lawyer, had just received the news that she'd been accepted to a prestigious law school. Her father, Thomas, a successful businessman who owned Willow's Bistro, had made reservations for the family to celebrate. It wasn't often that they all managed to gather in one place, so tonight was special. The soft clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation filled the air. The restaurant was bustling with patrons, each enjoying their evening out. The waitstaff moved swiftly between tables, delivering meals with efficiency and a smile. Maya and her family were shown to a large booth near the windows, offering a view of the twinkling street lights outside. Maya's mother, Clara, had a warm smile as she took in the surroundings, admiring the soft lighting and rich decor. Her younger brother, Malik, was already flipping through the menu, his eyes wide with excitement at the thought of the meal ahead. Maya, on the other hand, was lost in her thoughts. The acceptance letter in her bag felt like a heavy weight, but it was a weight she wore proudly. She could feel her father's gaze, warm and full of pride. Thomas had always been a quiet man, focused and determined, but tonight he was beaming with joy. This was his daughter's moment, and nothing could make him prouder. As they settled in, Maya's eyes briefly wandered across the room, catching the movements of the waitstaff. One particular waitress, who was serving a nearby table, caught her attention. She was a young woman, tall with auburn hair tied back in a tight ponytail. Her uniform was immaculate, and she moved with an almost rehearsed grace. Maya had seen her before on a couple of other visits to the restaurant. She had always appeared polite, though there was something in her eyes that Maya couldn't quite place. Something sharp, maybe even cold. But tonight, that same waitress, named Lisa, approached their table with a forced smile. "Good evening," Lisa said, her voice a little too sweet. "What can I get you to drink?" Maya, her mother, and Malik all gave their drink orders, but it was Thomas who caught Lisa's attention. As he spoke, Maya saw the brief flicker of something in Lisa's eyes, something Maya couldn't quite define, but it made her feel uneasy. Lisa's smile faltered for just a moment, and Maya's mother, sensing the subtle tension, gave a polite smile to ease the awkwardness. The waitress scribbled down the order and then paused, glancing at Thomas again. "I'll be back with your drinks," Lisa said, her tone shifting slightly as she turned and walked away. Maya watched her go, but her attention was soon pulled back to her father, who was speaking to her brother about the latest soccer game. Thomas was a strong figure in Maya's life, a pillar of stability, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the interaction. It wasn't unusual for strangers to react strangely to her family, but there was something different about the way Lisa had looked at them. Maya's instinct told her that this wasn't just another run-of-the-mill encounter. Lisa's attitude seemed tinged with something more. "Everything okay?" Maya's mother asked, noticing her daughter's distracted expression. "I'm fine," Maya replied with a smile. "Just a bit tired, I guess." As they continued their conversation, the moment passed, and they settled into the rhythm of their evening. But in the back of Maya's mind, a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, in the back of the restaurant, Lisa was preparing the drinks for their table. She moved with quick, deliberate movements, as though she were trying to outrun something. As she placed the drinks on the tray, her thoughts were clouded, and the flicker of judgment remained in her mind. She had always held certain biases, and seeing a black family intersection triggered something in her. Something ugly she wasn't quite ready to confront. Lisa wasn't proud of her feelings, but they had been ingrained in her over the years. Growing up in a small town where people like her father, wealthy, influential, white, held the power, Lisa had learned early on to see the world in a very narrow way. People of color, especially those with authority or success, felt threatening to her, as though they were invading spaces they didn't belong. Maya's family was just another reminder of how the balance had shifted in ways she couldn't understand, and she resented it. As she walked back to their table with the drinks, Lisa tried to shake off her unease. The family seemed pleasant enough, but that didn't change her deep-seated beliefs. She forced a smile as she set the drinks down and asked if they were ready to order. Maya's family went through the menu, and as the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Lisa couldn't help but overhear snippets of the discussion. The talk of college, success, and family was all too familiar to her, something she had always been taught to covet but never quite attained. The contrast between their lives and hers only fueled her frustration. Despite her internal conflict, Lisa went about her duties as usual, suppressing her thoughts and continuing to serve. But when the time came to place their orders, something in her snapped. Without thinking, as Maya's family asked for their meals, Lisa quietly but deliberately spit on the plate as she transferred the food from the kitchen to the table. She thought she was being subtle, but the spit was there, barely noticeable. It wasn't enough to be caught, but it was enough for Lisa to feel a sense of twisted satisfaction. She was in control, she had power, if only for a moment, and she reveled in it. Little did she know, her actions would set off a chain of events that would forever change her life. The moment passed, and the family continued their meal without suspicion. Maya, though still troubled by Lisa's strange behavior earlier, had no idea that something sinister had just transpired. She took a bite of her meal, savoring the flavors as she and her family enjoyed their conversation. But in the back of the room, Clara noticed something that made her stomach churn. The waitress, who had just left the table, was standing at the kitchen window, looking directly at them. It was as though she was waiting for a reaction, eager to see how they would respond. Clara frowned, but it was only when she saw the look on Lisa's face, one that was filled with a strange sense of satisfaction, that she began to feel a deep, unsettling worry. Clara's protective instincts kicked in. She didn't know what Lisa had done, but something wasn't right. And with every passing moment, Clara's unease grew. The evening seemed to unfold like any other night at Willow's Bistro. Maya's family continued to eat, unaware of the taint that now lingered on their plates. The warm atmosphere that had once filled the air now felt subtly disturbed. Clara's unease wasn't something that could easily be shaken off. She knew something was wrong, though she couldn't place it. She glanced at Maya, who was happily chatting with Malik, her excitement about the future momentarily overshadowing the uneasiness that had clouded the night. As the dinner progressed, Clara kept her eyes on the waitress, Lisa. The young woman had returned to their table only once more, bringing a fresh round of drinks, but the exchange felt even colder than before. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was watching them from the corner of her eye, and each time their gazes met, there was a slight twitch in Lisa's smile, a forced attempt at civility, hiding something darker beneath the surface. When dessert was served, Maya was almost ready to call it a night. She had enjoyed herself, but something about the restaurant's energy seemed to have shifted, like a cloud had covered the warmth of the evening. She didn't understand why, but her body language had become more tense, her thoughts distracted. It was as if the joy had been sucked from the air. Unbeknownst to Maya, her father, Thomas, had begun to feel the weight of the situation as well. Something about Lisa's behavior toward the family seemed off. He couldn't quite pinpoint it, but as the owner of the restaurant, he knew that every employee's attitude directly impacted his business, and the unease that had settled over their table had not gone unnoticed by him. As a successful businessman, he had a keen sense for reading people, whether it was customers or employees, and Lisa had piqued his suspicion. "Clara," he whispered, leaning in closer as he continued to watch Lisa, who was now back in the kitchen area, speaking with a manager. "Something's not right." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I can't put my finger on it, but the way she keeps looking at us, it's not just about the service. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but something's off." Clara, always protective of her family, nodded slowly. "I've been noticing it too. The way she glances over at us, it's strange. Almost like she's waiting for a reaction." Thomas frowned. "Maybe we should speak to the manager before we leave. I'll have a word with him about Lisa's attitude." But before they could discuss the matter further, something entirely unexpected happened. As the night wore on, Maya noticed that Lisa had walked toward their table again. She was holding a check in one hand, the other hand hidden behind her back. Maya's gaze flickered to her father, who was busy discussing something with her mother. The moment Lisa reached the table, she seemed to hesitate, her lips twitching as though she had something to say but was choosing her words carefully. "Your bill," Lisa said flatly, her voice now lacking the sweetness that had previously masked her discomfort. She placed the check on the table without making eye contact. But it wasn't just the coldness of her tone that caught Maya's attention. It was the faintest trace of something else in Lisa's posture. Something predatory. Something malicious. Maya's pulse quickened. She tried to brush the feeling off, but it gnawed at her, the unease intensifying. She picked up the check and glanced at it. There was nothing unusual about the charges. Everything seemed standard, and yet Maya couldn't shake the sensation that something wasn't right. Maya's eyes darted to Lisa's hand, which had been hidden behind her back. As the waitress turned to leave, something caught Maya's eye, a small, almost imperceptible glint. A flash of something metallic, something small that had fallen to the floor near the edge of the table. Without thinking, Maya reached down and picked it up. It was a small, silver object, nothing more than a piece of twisted metal, likely a fragment of something that had fallen off of Lisa's uniform. But the mere sight of it sent a chill down Maya's spine. Why had Lisa looked at her with such a strange expression? Why had she acted so strange all night? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the feeling of dread that had taken hold of her. It was just a piece of metal, nothing more. But the sense of foreboding refused to leave. As the night drew to a close, Maya's family stood to leave. Thomas paid the bill at the front counter, and they all filed out of the restaurant. The cool night air a stark contrast to the tension that still lingered inside. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, Maya caught one last glimpse of Lisa through the restaurant's windows. The waitress was watching them leave, her eyes cold and calculating. "Dad, I don't think she likes us," Maya muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Thomas didn't respond immediately, his mind focused elsewhere. But his concern was evident. The fact that Maya had picked up on the same discomfort he had felt earlier only reinforced his suspicions about the waitress. Still, they left the restaurant without incident, heading home to unwind after what had been a celebratory evening. Later that night, however, things began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. Back in the bistro, after Maya's family had left, Lisa retreated to the employee lounge in the back of the restaurant. There, she removed her apron, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped away the sweat from her forehead. She had done it. She had crossed the line, done something that felt right, something that would put them in their place. She couldn't explain it, couldn't even justify it to herself. But when she had watched Maya's family sit there, so content, so sure of their place in the world, something in Lisa had snapped. It was the arrogance, the pride they carried with them. Pride that seemed undeserved, as though it had been handed to them on a silver platter. Lisa's fingers curled into fists. She didn't have much, didn't have the power or privilege that people like Maya's family took for granted. But tonight she had control. She had been in charge, even if it was only for a brief moment. And that had been enough. But then, her manager, Carl, walked into the lounge. He was a big man, with thick arms and a gruff voice, but it was the look in his eyes that made Lisa freeze. He wasn't angry. No, that would have been easier to deal with. What Lisa saw in Carl's eyes was a quiet understanding, a disapproval that cut deeper than any yelling could. "I saw what you did, Lisa," he said quietly. "That wasn't just unprofessional, it was personal. And I don't care what your reasons were, but this isn't how we do things here. You don't get to treat customers like that." Lisa swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had known Carl for years, and she had always tried to keep her biases in check while working at Willow's Bistro. But tonight, she had let everything go. She had acted on instinct, driven by the resentment she had buried deep down for so long. "Carl, she started, but her voice faltered. "I didn't mean to. No excuses," Carl interrupted. "You'll be seeing the owner tomorrow. You can explain yourself to him. I don't want to hear another word about it." The next morning, Lisa arrived at work early, her nerves frazzled, her stomach twisting with dread. She hadn't slept much the night before, and when she had managed to close her eyes, the images of Maya's family, sitting at the table with their perfect smiles and laughter, had haunted her. The way she had watched them, seething, thinking of everything they represented, had felt like a release. But now, the reality of what she'd done was setting in. There was no turning back. As soon as Lisa entered the restaurant, she was greeted by Carl, who didn't waste any time. "Let's go," Carl said gruffly, his voice carrying an edge of seriousness. "The boss is waiting for you in his office." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She had seen Thomas around the restaurant often. He was the owner, the face of the place. He was well known in the local community, successful, respected, and to be honest, a little intimidating. Lisa had always felt like a small fish in a big pond when it came to Thomas. He didn't seem to have any real interest in her life or her actions, but that didn't mean he wouldn't come down hard on her now. She followed Carl to the office, each step feeling heavier than the last. And when they finally reached the door, Carl knocked softly before pushing it open. Inside, Thomas was sitting behind a desk, his posture impeccable, his expression unreadable. His presence alone made Lisa feel small, vulnerable. "Lisa, have a seat," Thomas said, his voice calm but firm. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her stomach churn. "We need to talk." Lisa hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She could feel the weight of Thomas's gaze on her, searching, assessing. "I've heard some troubling reports about your behavior last night," Thomas continued, leaning back in his chair. "It's come to my attention that you treated a customer poorly. No, worse than that. You treated them with malice. And for what? Because they were just enjoying a meal at my restaurant?" Lisa wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. She had no excuse, no defense. What had she done? She had let her anger take over, her resentment cloud her judgment. She'd acted in a way that was completely unacceptable. She started, but Thomas raised a hand, silencing her. "I don't want to hear excuses," Thomas said. "You understand what you did, right? You disrespected my customers. You put my business in jeopardy. And for what? Because you couldn't stand the sight of them?" Lisa winced at the harshness of his words, but they were deserved. Deep down, she knew it. What had possessed her? Why had she let her emotions get the better of her? It wasn't like her to act out like that. She wasn't a violent person, wasn't someone who typically let her personal feelings cloud her work. But this had been different. This had been personal. "Do you realize who that family was?" Thomas's voice cut through her thoughts. Lisa blinked, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What?" "The girl you spat on. Her name's Maya. Her father is Thomas Lawson, Jr., one of the biggest campaign donors in the city. He's been supporting me for years, investing in my businesses, keeping the lights on here." Thomas stood up, pacing slowly in front of his desk. "He's the kind of person I owe my success to." Lisa's heart stopped. Maya. That name, it sounded familiar, but now it clicked. The family, the father, everything. Maya's family had been there last night, enjoying their meal, unaware that she had been the one who had tried to poison their experience. The shame that washed over her now was nearly unbearable. I didn't know," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Thomas said with a cold sigh. "And that's the problem. You acted out of hatred, out of prejudice, without knowing who you were dealing with. You thought you could get away with it. But now you've made a mess, and I'm the one who has to clean it up." Lisa felt her face flush with embarrassment. This was worse than she could have imagined. The entire weight of her actions was crashing down on her, and there was no escape. She had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I shouldn't have done it. I lost control." Thomas looked at her for a long, quiet moment before speaking again. His tone was softer now, though still laced with disappointment. "You're right. You lost control. And now you have to face the consequences. But it's not just me you have to answer to." Lisa's mind raced as Thomas continued to speak, her thoughts consumed by the mounting dread of what might come next. "I'm going to let this go for now," Thomas said, his voice firm. "But if I ever see something like this happen again, if you ever disrespect my customers, my family, or anyone else like you did last night, I will make sure you're out of here faster than you can blink. Understood?" Lisa nodded quickly, grateful for his mercy, but she could feel the sting of shame creeping over her. She had embarrassed herself, and now she had embarrassed Thomas. What would she say to Maya and her family? How could she ever look them in the eye again? Meanwhile, Maya and her family were far from aware of the brewing storm inside Willow's bistro. They went about their daily lives unconcerned, still wrapped in the calm after their dinner the night before. But unbeknownst to them, The small action of Lisa's cruelty had set in motion a chain of events that would soon unravel in ways none of them could have predicted. Back at the restaurant, as Lisa sat in the office feeling the weight of her guilt, she couldn't help but replay the incident in her mind. The face of the young girl, Maya, seemed to haunt her. The innocent smile had betrayed a sharp contrast to the bitter anger Lisa had been harboring for so long. She had let herself become a victim of her own emotions, and now she would pay the price. She wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when she finally left the office, Carl was there waiting for her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes betraying nothing. She swallowed hard. "You better get it together, Lisa," Carl said with a sigh. "Thomas gave you a second chance. You won't get another one." As the day stretched on, Lisa couldn't shake the weight of what she had done. The more she thought about Maya's family, the more regret swelled within her chest. It was as if every minute, every hour that passed made the shame of her actions more unbearable. The confrontation with Thomas had left her shaken, but there was something deeper lingering, an unmistakable feeling that her life, her future, was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't control. Back in her small apartment later that evening, Lisa sat by the window, staring out at the city lights below. She didn't feel at home here, in this quiet corner of the world, but it had been the only place she could afford after the divorce. She had hoped that things would settle, that her bitterness would subside. But now, as she reflected on what had happened with Maya and her family, all she felt was this sharp, gnawing sense of inevitability. What had she done? How could she have been so blind? She wanted to forget, to escape the consequences, but she knew that wouldn't happen. She had to face it, and she had to face it soon. The sound of her phone ringing interrupted her thoughts. With a sigh, she picked it up, hoping for some distraction. But the caller ID flashed something she wasn't ready for. Maya's father, Thomas Lawson Jr. Her heart skipped a beat. Taking a deep breath, Lisa answered the call. "Hello." Her voice was shaky, betraying her nerves. "Hello, Lisa. This is Thomas Lawson Jr." The voice on the other end said, smooth and controlled, yet with an undertone of steel. "I wanted to speak with you personally." Lisa felt a cold sweat bead at the back of her neck. This is it. The moment she had dreaded, the moment of reckoning. She could almost hear the weight of his words before he even spoke them. "I understand that you work at Willow's Bistro," Thomas continued, "and I'm aware of what happened last night. I have to tell you, I'm not pleased with what I've heard." Lisa swallowed hard, barely managing to hold her composure. I know, Mr. Lawson. I'm deeply sorry for what I did. It was inexcusable. I don't know what came over me." "Lisa," Thomas said, his voice suddenly sharp, "you don't get it, do you? It's not just about your apology. It's about your actions, your behavior. Do you understand how serious this is? This wasn't some random act of disrespect. This was targeted, hateful behavior. Do you think people like you get to treat others like that and just walk away?" Lisa's stomach twisted. She had never been a person to back down from confrontation, but now the fear was overwhelming. What was she supposed to say to this man who had the power to destroy her with a few well-chosen words? "Mr. Lawson, Let me make this clear, Lisa," Thomas interjected, his voice colder now. "I've heard enough. I don't take kindly to people treating my family like that, especially in my own establishment. What you did could have cost you your job, but I'm willing to be reasonable here." Lisa didn't dare speak. The air seemed too heavy to fill with anything but silence. Her heart raced in her chest as Thomas paused on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted. It was more like a warning now, more like a challenge. "You're going to meet me tomorrow morning," he said, his voice smooth again, but laced with a quiet threat. "I'm giving you one chance to show me that you can own up to your mistake. I want to see you face to face, to hear from you exactly why you did what you did. If you can't do that, you'll regret it." Lisa's breath hitched in her throat. He wasn't done. He wasn't done with her at all. The call ended abruptly, leaving Lisa holding her phone to her ear, her mind racing. What could she say? What could she do? The only thing she could think of now was to show up tomorrow, humble herself, and hope she could salvage whatever was left of her dignity. The next morning, Lisa arrived at Thomas's office earlier than expected, her mind filled with dread. The office building loomed over her, cold and imposing, a silent reminder of her place in this world. She felt like an insect, small and insignificant, ready to be squashed by the weight of Thomas Lawson Jr.'s judgment. She was ushered into the office by a secretary, and there he was again, sitting behind a large desk. Thomas was already seated when she entered, his posture impeccable, his eyes hard as stone. The room was stark, sterile. Everything about it screamed power, dominance, control. Lisa stood before him, her knees trembling, but she refused to show weakness. She had to do this. She had to make things right, even if she didn't understand how to do that. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson," Lisa said, her voice soft but steady. "I was wrong. What I did was completely inexcusable. There's no excuse for how I treated your family. I let my anger cloud my judgment, and I know that I hurt your daughter and your family. I regret it deeply." Thomas's eyes narrowed as he listened, studying her every movement, her every word. Lisa could see that he was weighing her sincerity, trying to determine whether her apology was genuine or just a desperate attempt to save face. She held her breath, hoping against hope that it was enough. Thomas remained silent for a long time, his gaze unflinching. Then, finally, he spoke. "Apologies aren't enough, Lisa," he said slowly, his voice measured. "Words don't undo actions. But I'm willing to give you a chance, one chance, to prove that you've learned something from this. A public apology, a donation to a charity I'm closely associated with, and a formal written apology to my family." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "If you can do that, I'll consider this matter closed. If not, I'll make sure it follows you wherever you go." Lisa felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. But it wasn't a weight of relief. It was the weight of knowing she'd be forced to live with the consequences of her actions, no matter how much she tried to fix it. "I'll do it," she said, her voice low, resigned. Thomas stood up then, walking around his desk to stand in front of her. He looked down at her with an unreadable expression, his eyes hard but not without a trace of something else. Something like respect, or maybe even pity. "Good," he said. "Now go. And remember this. Actions have consequences, Lisa. And people don't forget." Lisa nodded, feeling the full weight of his words as she left the office. She had done the right thing, but the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. She would have to live with her mistakes, learn from them, and rebuild what she had destroyed. But as she walked out into the daylight, she couldn't help but wonder if there was something more she would have to face before it was all over. The weeks that followed were filled with a sense of tension that Lisa couldn't quite shake. She had completed her public apology, as Thomas had demanded, and the charity donation had been processed without much fanfare. A few local news outlets had picked up the story, making it a brief footnote in the public eye. But for Lisa, it felt like everything had changed. The lingering humiliation and the weight of the apology followed her everywhere she went. Each day at Willow's Bistro, she felt the stares of her co-workers and the uneasy glances of the regulars. There were whispers behind her back, and though no one had dared to openly confront her, she knew her reputation was forever tarnished. She had been the cause of a scandal that had rippled through the tight-knit community, a stain she couldn't scrub away. Lisa thought about Maya and her family every day. Their faces haunted her, the memory of Maya's fury and the coldness of Thomas's voice haunting her in her dreams. She had hoped the apology would be enough, but deep down, Lisa knew it wasn't. It was just the beginning of a long and painful process of healing, not just for Maya, but for herself. One afternoon, as she sat at the counter during a break, nursing a cup of coffee, Lisa overheard a conversation between two of the other waitresses. It wasn't anything new, gossip about the customers, the weather, the usual small talk, but something in their tone made her freeze. "I heard Mr. Lawson is considering pulling out his investments from Willow's," one of the waitresses said. "And with everything that happened, I wouldn't blame him." Lisa's stomach dropped. She had no idea how deep Thomas's influence ran in the community, but hearing that his family had such sway over the bistro made her stomach churn. Could this be the consequence she feared all along? Had her mistake cost her more than just her dignity? Could she lose her job, the one thing she had left? "That would be a huge blow," the other waitress replied. "I don't think the owner would survive that." Lisa couldn't breathe. The restaurant meant everything to her. It was her livelihood, her escape from the chaos of her personal life. But she had crossed a line, and now she wondered if Thomas's power was enough to destroy it all. The next morning, Lisa arrived at work earlier than usual, hoping to get a sense of the atmosphere before the rest of the staff arrived. She noticed the owner, Mr. Richards, deep in conversation with the general manager. Their voices were low, but Lisa could still catch the gist of their words. "I can't lose that kind of investment, Steve," Mr. Richards was saying. "Lawson's family has been a part of this business for years. His influence could keep us afloat in these tough times." Lisa felt her heart sink. It's happening. She wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what was going on. Thomas had come for her job. Just then, Mr. Richards spotted her, and his face hardened, as though he had already made his decision. He walked over to her, his face drawn with concern. "Lisa, we need to talk." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She followed him into his office, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Mr. Richards sat behind his desk, his eyes heavy with disappointment. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired, as if he had been carrying a burden for far too long. "Lisa," he started slowly, "I've been receiving pressure from the Lawson family. Their involvement with this restaurant is significant. And after everything that happened, well, it's becoming difficult to ignore." Lisa felt the room close in around her. She could already feel the familiar burn of shame creeping up her neck. "I never wanted to bring you into this, Lisa. You're a good worker, and you've always been dedicated. But Thomas and his family have made it clear that they don't want you here anymore. The damage you've done to their reputation is something they can't overlook. It's not just the apology. It's everything that came with it. The media, the whispers, the public opinion. It's too much." Lisa's world spun. She couldn't breathe. The restaurant, her escape, the one thing that had kept her from spiraling, was slipping away from her grasp. How had it come to this? "I'm sorry," Mr. Richards said, his voice almost too soft. "But I have no choice." Lisa's mind went blank. She wanted to scream, to beg him to reconsider, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. The Lawson family had won. Thomas had gotten what he wanted. That evening, Lisa packed her belongings from the small break room, the weight of what had just happened sinking in with every step. Her hands trembled as she shoved her apron into her bag, the familiar weight of her work shoes feeling alien now. She wasn't sure where she was going to go, what she was going to do, but the path ahead felt darker than it had ever been. The streets outside were quieter than usual as Lisa walked home, the cool breeze brushing past her face. It was a strange, empty feeling, like she had been uprooted from everything that had been familiar, everything she had once relied on. She thought about the waitress's gossip, the conversation about Thomas Lawson's power, and how the ripple effects had spread through her life. But there was something else she couldn't shake, something deeper and more unsettling. It wasn't just the loss of her job. It wasn't just the shame or the guilt. It was the realization that no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she apologized, the weight of her actions would always follow her. Days turned into weeks. Lisa found herself drifting through life, unsure of what to do next. She couldn't bring herself to look for another job at a restaurant. She was too ashamed. The thought of facing more people who might know about her mistake was unbearable. But then, one day, as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, an unexpected email appeared in her inbox. The subject line read, "Thank you." Lisa opened it with trembling fingers, and when she read the message, her heart almost stopped. It was from Maya. "I just wanted to say thank you, Lisa. Your apology meant more than you'll ever know. I'm not sure if you understand the weight of what you did, but I want you to know that it made a difference. I see that you're trying, and that matters. People like you can change, and that's what gives me hope." Lisa sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. She couldn't believe it. Maya had forgiven her, or at least she had acknowledged her attempt at redemption. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness after all. It wasn't the end of Lisa's journey, but it was the beginning of something new. A chance at redemption, a chance to learn, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. The consequences would always be there, following her like a shadow. But she had learned one crucial lesson. It's never too late to change.